We're going to start the 6:15 public hearing on the land use update. Brody is.
Thank you, Mayor, members of City Council. This is the public hearing for the city's comprehensive land use plan. This is a land use plan, which is an update to the 2006 land use plan, which is the People Planning Perrysburg plan. Now, judging by the number of folks we have with us this evening, I want to start out in introducing you to the concept of what a land use plan is. A land use plan is a planning document that is contracted through my office, the Planning and Zoning Office, with an outside consultant of OHM Advisors out of Columbus, Ohio, that have a local attachment to the city of Perrysburg. Perrysburg graduates worked on this project. They are outside nationally recognized planning firms that helped us establish this document that I've presented to you this evening. The land use plan does a lot of things and doesn't do a lot of things all at the same time. The land use plan is designed to act as a roadmap. As folks like yourselves, elected officials, are tasked with the public hearing topics like we just saw just a few minutes ago for rezonings. This is a roadmap that you can look at proactively instead of being reactive when requests come in. So what this document attempted to do is understand the dynamics of Perrysburg. Who and what is Perrysburg? What are the folks that live here want to see more of, want to see less of? What is the future direction of the city? So we went through this plan. We had approximately 800 folks that were engaged and participating through the process in some form or another. There were online surveys, there were Zoom meetings, there were steering committee members, there were statistically valid surveys that people were solicited here in the community for their thoughts and inputs. All that information is recorded in here. So we found out the average ages of the folks that lived here, incomes, size of houses, sizes of lots, what some of these people did for work, how they felt about our parks, how they felt about our business community, our housing choices, all of that. These things are captured in this particular document. And as we go through this process, like I said, this will ultimately be a guide for you, a decision-making guide. Some of the areas that we included in here are not in the city of Perrysburg. Some of those areas would include Middleton Township, Perrysburg Township. In putting together the steering committee, we did reach out to the folks to see if they wanted to have representation on there as part of steering committee members. Some levels of participation were very good, others we didn't hear from. So what we did, because this is supposed to be a very, very long-range planning document. This could be a document that's used by the city for the next 20 to 30 years, somewhere in that area. It's typically refreshed a little more often than that because cities like Perrysburg are growing so quickly, but they're designed to be a very long-range planning document for the city. And therefore, it takes into account recognizing areas that are not currently in the city that could, in the future at some point, come into the city. And so we use the water, sanitary sewer service area because that is the theoretical limits of what the city could accept into the city under our control through measures of annexation, whether that be voluntary or forcible annexation. So after this very long process, we began this process probably a little over 18 months ago. So this has been a very long process in the making. We put out a lot of feelers to get people to participate in these meetings. Some of you up here actually did participate in those meetings. The end result of this particular document is a summary of all the facts that we found out about the city. There are recommendations that are provided by the consultants based on feedback that we received. And again, these are all things that have been statistically verified. If you remember when we asked council to authorize this contract, we requested additional money to make sure that we were statistically validating all of the responses that we got. Because as I pointed out early in the process, a lot of times when council is asked to make a decision, such as the rezoning just a few minutes ago, we noticed a common theme, and it's I think and I feel. So that while that's what you have to work with, that's not always the best way to make decisions. You need to have confidence in the information that you're using when you make very important land use decisions, because these decisions affect the city for generations to come. So we wanted to give you the confidence and the assurance that you were working with good information, quality information that was coming from the constituents and represented what they truly wanted their community to be. So as we did this, again, it's a very large two-sided document. The final product of this is really the future land use map. Okay, that's really the important part, and that's a map that looks roughly like this. For those of you that are familiar with the zoning map, it looks very much like this. Colors on a piece of paper, an aerial photograph, designating which areas of the city should be used for which purposes. And as part of that, it takes into account existing land uses, proposed land uses, vacant land, how we might see things like that developing in the future. And it summarizes that all in one sheet, so that when you're asked to make decisions, you can understand the direction and perhaps a goal that the city has set for itself to work towards. Now, does every aspect of a land use plan happen? Absolutely not. Does the majority of the content of a land use plan happen? Absolutely not. But if a certain percentage of this plan can be implemented and improve the quality of life for Perrysburg residents and our neighbors, that's worth the exercise and the investment that the city has made to have a plan if and when certain situations arise. So, and the other thing I want to make very clear about this particular plan is this is not something that the city is entirely in control of. There are private property rights that are involved in this. And again, that'll come up as we talk about some of the case studies or scenarios that were incorporated in this document. So this isn't something that the city of Perrysburg has expressed any interest in going out and proactively acquiring properties and implementing these plans. These are just saying if and when a situation arises. For example, Ohio Cat was located on State Route 25. And some folks told me, well, Ohio Cat will be here forever. Well, here we are. Ohio Cat has located. If we didn't have a plan to backfill Ohio Cat on State Route 25, we might sit there with an empty building and not achieve a higher and better use for the vacant cat property. The city didn't remove Ohio Cat. We didn't lure them down the street. These are just things that happened, and without a plan, you don't set yourself up for success. So again, some of these scenarios may never happen. But this is the different case studies and scenarios are probably what I have received the most feedback on regarding this particular plan. So what I wanted to point out is that there are a couple scenarios in here. Probably most notably was the American Steel Treating property. Many of you are familiar with that over on Mulberry Street, and I believe that's 6th Street, 6th and Mulberry. We now have a vacant industrial use on that property. This is a very unique time for us to have a land use plan because we can look and say, we have a very large, impactful piece of property in a residential neighborhood. We may or may not want to see that reused for another industrial purpose, being that it's so integral to the existing neighborhood. This plan gives us the opportunity to examine what it could be, not what the city is going to buy it and turn it into. We're not really in that game. But this gives us a chance to examine what are some creative ways that these properties could be reused for the benefit of the larger community. So we went through and we did some scenario planning. We scenario planned American Steel Trading, which ironically, somewhere through this process, actually went out of business and is sitting there vacant today. So these are the scenarios that we're preparing for, things that were beyond the city's control, that you inherit, that may be sold to somebody else that comes to you and asks for permission to do something. So this will give you an opportunity to proactively look at these and say, if we ever have the chance again, through no fault of our own, to do something different with this property, what would we like to see? And how do we implement the tools, adopt the tools, to allow a developer to build our vision on these properties? Because I will tell you that not every scenario in this plan is consistent with the zoning code as it currently exists. The next phase of this would be to inform some of our zoning code changes to allow a developer to build our vision in certain locations. So again, I talked about American Steel Treating. We want to talk about Country Charm Shopping Center on South Boundary and Louisiana Avenue. That was another scenario planning. That's a very complicated scenario planning on that particular property. There's multiple owners. It's a condominium development. So again, these are scenarios that we went through. We identified significant properties in the city. Okay, so that includes American Steel Treating, Country Charm Shopping Center, the old Commodore Schoolyard across from the O'Deere Diner. It included a portion of downtown, Perry's Landing. Some of you are familiar with that, there by the railroad tracks across from the library. And we also, at the request of some folks from the Heights, included a scenario planning event for the Heights as well. So all these really are, and I know I've received some word, there was some excitement about some of these plans. These are case studies, and again, these are theoretical scenarios to say, if market forces as they currently exist, we've seen some erosion of the Heights along State Route 25 in the form of AAA, social development, the Taco Bell, the property behind Taco Bell. There are market forces, there are commercial interests that have acquired property along State Route 25. So again, the city, in this particular case, I know that most of the feedback I received was from Perrysburg Heights, so I'll spend a few more minutes talking about that one than the other ones. The city has not actively participated in any of those acquisitions. This property is not within the city of Perrysburg. There have been questions for years about to annex, not to annex. So this property still resides in Perrysburg Township. But we would be remiss as a city to say we have an island inside of our community and to not provide a thoughtful plan as to what happens to that area should it come into the city and market forces over time, again, in the next 50 years. If private interests slowly take over particular properties, how can we make sure that whatever is introduced into the city is compatible and beneficial to everybody involved? So the things I really want to stress about this is these are just scenarios of people on the outside looking in and saying, if something would ever happen to any of these locations, what would be a community asset and benefit to introduce here? And how can we make sure that the rules and requirements that we have would allow something like this to be built to achieve a reimagined image of a particular area? Whether it's Perrysburg Heights, or it's downtown Perrysburg, or it's Country Charm Shopping Center. These are all theoretical scenarios because when you present to somebody like you all as elected officials and say, here is a text version of all the things that you should do different in code language. A lot of people will say, well, that's great, but what does that mean? I don't know what that means. I don't know what that does. So these scenario-based plans were designed to show you a picture of what these follow-up things in another process, maybe a year from now, could say. You could change some of the rules and regulations to allow something like this to happen. Is this a vision that you think is creative? Do you think this is a vision that's in the best interest of the community? And you can unlock those tools to allow something like that to happen. Is it going to look exactly like the scenario-based plans? Probably not. No, it won't. Will all these scenarios eventually happen in the next 20 to 50 years? Probably not likely at all. But if any of the scenario-based planning help us make a decision on any development in the city, then it was time well spent. So again, these plans are not solidified plans. They're just creative attempts to display what places and spaces could be if the will is there. And again, it should go without saying, but it doesn't always. But there are private property rights that affect all of this. I received a call from Mr. Bob Maurer from Greenbrier Realty, who owns Perry's Landing, saying, what's the deal? The city's going to take my property and you want to tear it down and put up a parking lot and a green space. And I explained to him, I said, no, Bob, that's not our intention. We're just simply saying if Perry's Landing building ever becomes functionally obsolete, outlives its useful life, and you decide as a building owner that you would like to redevelop that and make a higher and better use of that property because it's so important to the city, right there across from the library in the downtown, we're showing you a very creative way in which you could use that and maybe recognize a return from that and provide an asset to the community. So he basically said to me, well, you've created a scenario that I could consider in the future if I would choose to do something like that. I said, absolutely. You've got it 100%. We have done the groundwork and the creative work for you to say this is an option. So these are always options for anybody. Obviously, the more property owners that you have involved, like the Condominium Association of Country Charm, or in the case of the Heights, this isn't something that the city comes in with a wrecking ball and does anything. It's a very long, slow process over time, and nothing happens without the consent of the property owners, recognizing those property rights. So hopefully that kind of soft introduction will, alleviate some of the fears or perhaps some of the misinformation that, originated through, various forms of social media and things like that, and really brings this down to kind of the more human level of understanding that it's a plan, and it's up to everybody, and everybody's in control of their own destiny. You own property, you're entitled to certain rights with that, and that is certainly recognized and appreciated.
Could you, just before council asks questions, the timeline of what happens next? Nothing's being decided today.
Correct.
What is the next steps in this process?
So the next step in the process, and again, we are in no rush to make anything happen with anything in this particular plan, because we realize that this is a very important document, and it's better to get it right than it is to do it quick. Okay, so it's been 18 months. I'm not opposed to taking as long as it takes to make sure that it's right. It's done right and done well. Can't guarantee that everybody will like every aspect of the plan, but it will be a thoughtful plan nonetheless. So the next steps of this particular process, and again, as I talked about with the last public hearing, the opportunity tonight is not to vote on anything. Okay, this is a procedural requirement. When things happen in planning and zoning that affect land use or code-related issues, there's a very specific process that we go through to make sure that people have the time to know what we're talking about, have the time to voice their support, voice their opposition, and are heard. Okay, and I think the presence of the folks here in the room tonight suggests that that has accomplished its goal. This is a forum for people to be heard, to ask questions, to gain some clarity. But again, the council members this evening will not be taking any action. We're not asking for a vote on anything. This is just simply, I'm going to say, an open mic night, if you will. But the very next steps for this, it would be our intention to go to the Planning and Zoning Committee of Council next Wednesday, so that would be the 15th. It's a 5:30 meeting to discuss more specifically, and I have requested that our consultants that prepared this plan be present at that meeting to kind of walk us through maybe a deeper dive than I'm able to do here in the form of a public hearing. Following up on that, the Planning and Zoning Committee of Council would then decide, is this something that we need to go back, refine? Do we want to make some changes to that? I would look to City Council to set the schedule on when they would like to bring this forward to the full council for review and consideration, and ultimately an adoption in the form of an ordinance. So again, it's not a rush to get anything through. We certainly want to gather all the necessary feedback and make the right decisions.
All right, thank you. Council will have an opportunity to ask questions. Then, as I understand it, there are several representatives from the audience who have a chance to speak. Council meetings are not an open mic night, but we do want to get everybody's input. So what will generally happen, as you saw in the last meeting, we'll give the people who want to speak 3 to 5 minutes. I ask you to be brief. I don't have a tight mic. I don't cut the mic off. I just ask you to be courteous so that other people will have a chance to be heard as well. As I understand it, there's 3 to 5 people who will speak. If you can be 3 to 5 minutes, that would be great. Then council can ask any more questions. But I'll go down. Mark, you seem to want to go first if you want.
Oh, I can. I have, unless you want to start there. It's okay. Oh, okay. Well, Brody, first of all, I want to say, one of the most important things you said there is it's just something that what could be. So I think that's the, just make sure everyone knows that. But what I wanted to ask you was, I know this was presented to the planning commission on July 29th, right? And then back then, we had three focus areas.
That's correct.
All right, and now this one has 4 focus areas.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think it's worth repeating that I'd like to know when that 4th one got added and why it got added. So can you just kind of touch on that, were you contacted by someone?
Yep, I can answer that for you. So during the Planning Commission meeting, this was shared with the Planning Commission, it was attended by Mr. Paul Belazis. I believe he's the president of the Perrysburg Heights Community Association. He expressed some concerns with the report as it was currently written and asked for certain things to be refined and better explained. And he certainly advocated a position for Perrysburg Heights in that conversation. That prompted me to contact our consultants and say, we received some pushback. There were some email exchanges that went back and forth and explained some of Paul's concerns. I forwarded that on to them and said, what, if anything, do we need to do to address some of Paul's concerns? And they said, well, let us do some planning and some explanation. We will include them specifically, in the report, calling out the existing uses and things like that. Admittedly, not every concern that Paul had at that particular meeting is addressed in that report, and that was intentional. There are things that were intentionally clarified, and then there were some things that were intentionally omitted that were concerns of Mr. Belazis's. But that was that's really what precipitated that 4th scenario being added into that plan to fully recognize the existence of Perrysburg Heights, even though they are an area that's not currently within the jurisdictional boundaries of the city of Perrysburg.
Okay. And then,
was there any text at all about the heights prior to those concerns being raised?
There was limited descriptions, and it was vague, and I think that might have been part of Paul's concern, is that it was overly vague and may have been glanced over.
much like the other areas that aren't in the city limits.
Correct.
Right. So that's why it really wasn't focused on. And then what I noticed is, though, on our updated document that we have the 4th focus area in there, the heights, is it because they didn't have enough time, but there's no community impact report for that focus area? It is on the, we still have the other 3, and but nothing about the community impact. Were you aware of that?
I can't speak to the limitations on that. I do know they turned that around fairly quickly.
Yeah, that's what I'm
for us.
thinking. They just did it so quickly, yeah.
But again, not every, the other areas, the focus areas, are in the city of Perrysburg, so it was a little deeper dive into some of those areas.
Okay.
So that may have been why it wasn't as detailed as the other 3 properties that are currently in the city of Perrysburg.
Okay, all right. And then it's also important to know that a lot of this came up, and I know I may be repeating you, but that public input was a big part of this when they collected all their data. But would you say that most of that public input was, and when we advertised that, was directed more at city residents rather than non-city? Like maybe some residents of the Heights wouldn't even have reacted to any of that, the invitation for any public input of the forums that we had, not thinking that there would ever be any design for their area.
I think my personal answer to that is yes and no. It is the City of Perrysburg land use plan, so I think by nature it lends itself to folks who believe that they're directly impacted by the land use plan, that being Perrysburg residents specifically. Mr. Belazis was included, on the front end as being a stakeholder, as a representative for the larger community, being a stakeholder. So the invitation was certainly there to participate in a process, the ongoing process. And it was done so to a certain extent.
Okay, thanks. I wasn't aware that he was part of it. Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
And were the township officers invited?
We had reached out. I don't recall, this was 18 months ago, so I don't recall if it was trustees specifically, but I do know that we contacted their planning and zoning administrator.
They were asked to be part of the process.
Correct. They were included, and certainly we spent a considerable amount of time, energy, and effort to make sure that we cast the net as widely as we could. We honestly didn't turn anybody away. We were asking and begging people to participate in this process with us.
And a lot of the info was actually elicited from online. Solicitations from social media and other.
Correct, yes.
Which anybody could
City's website, social media, yes.
Do you have any questions?
I don't.
Do you have any questions?
So I would just ask, so there were 3 areas of focus, and then a 4th one was developed later. And of course, the scenario planning piece to this plan, it's kind of a broad vision for the rest of the community other than those 3 or 4 focuses, correct?
Yes, I would say that that's a fair and accurate assessment. What the scenarios do is they bring to life, in some cases in 3 dimension, what other areas of the city could develop. But we couldn't show you every neighborhood and every new subdivision in the city, what some of these ideas may translate into. So these are just, again, 4 examples, high impact examples that are shown. But yes, generally described and conveyed to you more generally throughout the city, yes.
So the vision, though, the scenario, and I haven't read Perrysburg Heights scenario, that is still a residential emphasis, if not, or how would you describe that?
What I would say, and again, I'm not the author of this, I was shepherding this through the process and helping to facilitate these. There is an acknowledgement of the historical and cultural significance of the existing neighborhoods. Are there promises in the report that the vision for the future might be exactly as it is today and unchanged? No, that is not in the report. Are there provisions for residential components to remain in the Perrysburg Heights area? Yes, there are.
If this gets approved, how concrete is it?
It's as concrete as elected officials are willing to make it. Again, this is designed to be for the residents of the city's benefit as well as your benefit as decision makers. This is a plan, it's a guidebook, it's a roadmap to achieving goals, okay? The goals are, some of them are text-based goals, some of them are graphic-based goals. And the idea is that we'll all come together, we may not agree, but the prevailing thought will be that this is a good plan or it's not a good plan, and we'll revise it until we get a good plan. And that as an elected official, you will uphold that plan and work towards the plan which, upon adoption, everybody will believe is in the best interest of the community as a whole. But does it mean that once it's adopted, it's going to happen? Absolutely not. It's just saying if that situation arises, that you believe this is a reasonable use of this property at this point in time, and obviously things change, that's why land use plans are updated, perhaps more frequently than 20 years. But to answer your question, is it concrete? It's not concrete, but in order to adopt the plan, the city should be willing to work towards a plan if that opportunity arises.
Thank you, that's all.
I actually do have 2 quick questions. Hopefully quick. One, we currently have no plans for any annexations, correct?
Excuse me, I couldn't hear you.
Let me rephrase that. We currently do not plan on annexing the
Exactly.
Heights. And-
Anybody, period.
Well, that's not
Well,
correct.
okay, now, which leads me to my second question.
There are some islands
I was-
that, let me explain. I mean,
Okay.
the plan is a broader based plan. The Heights is a particular section. We are not, with the 99-year agreement, nothing east of 75 would be annexed without approval or consent. The Heights is a particular part of the community. We have not taken any action to annex it. We do not plan on taking any question to annex it. There are some parcels that are other islands not near here that we may, consistent with the 99-year agreement, annex, but no decision has been made. But I don't want you to be saying, no, we're not going.
No, that's what I wanted, was that clarification. I'm well aware of the 99-year plan. I was here when, I've been
Right, so
resident for a while, so I'm aware of that. But that leads me to my question, second question. Is it typically our policy to have people come to us with annexation requests versus seek them out?
we would, like, for example, for the Heights, there is no It
Well, no,
depends.
like, yeah.
Property owners
That's-
want to develop a property, they come to us
Yes.
and we agree to annex. There are some people who are islands who have not been annexed but should be annexed because they're basically using city services and it's appropriate to annex, and so that may be we initiate. The Heights is a little bit more unique and specific, and as I told Paul, we do not have any particular plans at this time, when I'm the mayor, to annex the Heights unless the property owner voluntary would come to us and annex, and even then, we'd have to consider it.
Thank you very much. That's a clarification I wanted. I appreciate it.
Deborah, we'll go back.
I would say, thank you for your thoughts, Bertie. I would like to say, I've been here a long time as well, been here since 1975, and I've got lots of friends that grew up in the Heights, went to Perrysburg High School. They've been there for generations, since the 1920s. And my feeling is, let them be the vibrant community that they are, and leave them alone.
This is-
Yeah, I guess I kind of want to address the annex. I will, I guess, share a sentiment of Deborah's with a little caveat there. Right now, I agree, it's a vibrant community. I love going out there to visit. I've known Stephanie Serta for, it's probably been about 8 years now. And if she's here and she has concerns, so do I. I think it's very important to have plans for future use. And I get not liking the plan. If my house had a future plan of a park, that would concern me. I'd be at this meeting as well, and I understand that frustration in your presence here. So I kind of want to, I guess, refocus on the process and the inclusion of the Heights, because since it is the, I guess, the fourth focus area, and you're telling me it was by request of the Heights in particular. And I think it's important. Everyone knows that the Heights is not part of the city, but is very much a part of Perrysburg and its identity, right? So there should be a plan. So I don't necessarily like that the things we spent extra on, which the statistically validated survey that we harped on in planning and zoning, that wasn't necessarily reached out to them. One of my
I'll
questions.
be clear on that, that's not correct.
Okay.
And that's not correct.
So do we use phone numbers that are tied to the Heights?
We use phone numbers, the zip code.
Okay.
So-
it's
We all just found
419.
out about this like 24 hours.
Hold on a second.
Just saying,
If you're, please,
just saying.
no speaking from the audience, please.
Thank you.
I understand. So,
It was based on area code, so we were getting surround. Okay, that makes me feel better. I guess one of the questions I have, because this is, you can look out here. This is a historically Latino area. Were our meetings conducted in a manner with Spanish speaking as well to help facilitate communication for those residents in particular?
It was not. I would assume that we would have accommodated that if we would have had that request been made.
Okay. And then, two, I guess I'll point back to the fact that we said there's no plans for annexation. This is kind of just so we have a plan in case it happens, right, or there's some sort of road event. One of the things I'm looking at, and if I can get my computer back there, is there are things that the city would be involved with, a park, the roadways, things like that. Is there, just for clarification, because I haven't heard anything and I would be surprised if there were, is there a timeline for if annexation occurred, when we would start acting in the service committee to reevaluate the roadways or start doing the road enhanced streetscapes or the roundabouts? Has that been talked about at all?
It has not. But I think the practical answer to that is the minute something comes into our jurisdiction, we need to service it appropriately, and evaluate its condition. If there's something that is lacking or deteriorated, it would need to be improved like any area of the city that's been in the city for many, many years.
And then I guess, just to put this out there, because again, I value property rights and individuals that own that property. I don't think the city's gonna come out and steal it from you, but there is one tool that a city can use, for that's called eminent domain. Have there been
There
any?
has not been any discussion.
I just wanna-
ever
I just wanna
about
make it
eminent domain.
very clear
It's
that-
never, that's not, as a lawyer, eminent domain should not be used for property rights unless last straw times 5 squared. So,
Well, and not only should it not be used, in cases like this, it arguably cannot be used. There's a very narrow scope of things that eminent domain can be used for. For example, jurisdictions can acquire residential properties to build interstate bridges and freeways and things like that that serve a larger public good purpose. This, in my opinion, would be that none of these activities in this report would qualify for that.
And I share the same exact ideals you do when it comes to that, but I think we need to make that very clear for, there are people here that are concerned. I just want to make sure
It's very
that
important.
it's very clear that there's zero plan to take property from people that want to keep the property the way it is, as it is. So I think that kind of wraps up my questions. I would encourage, it sounds like we're going to planning and zoning next again. So I would encourage people that are interested to come to that committee meeting next Wednesday. I believe we scheduled that.
Next Wednesday, the 15th at 5:30.
5:30. And I'll leave it at that. And thank you, everybody, for showing up.
this is people to be heard. That's an important part of getting this in past plans that they developed. That was a big criticism of past plans, did not include people having an opportunity to be fully heard. So we've tried to bend over backwards to make sure that happened even during the pandemic. So we do appreciate everybody being here today. Do you have any questions?
I actually don't have any questions. I think everyone has asked my questions, but I do want to thank Brody at the beginning here for giving the clear comment statement, and Corey echoing. And I don't think that anyone up here is going to be for taking anybody's property rights, and I think that this is more of a guideline for the future, decades down the road, if something would become available. But it's not something that the city is going to be willing to take anybody's property or forcing them to change it. I can tell you, as long as I'm here, I'm not going to support anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely not. I really think there was a lot of misinformation given to a lot of people here. And I mean, my wife grew up in the Heights, and she still has family there. And even they were getting wrong information. And I just want you to know that nobody up here would be interested in taking anybody's property. But I'm really glad you all came here to tell us. And I want to make sure I see all the signs. You have one back there, but yeah, you took a lot of time to make that. That's really great. So thank you for that. Thank you.
I would love that for the thing. It is a unique community. That's why, in fact, and I'm all about that. And I agree with the rest of it.
If council adopts this plan, now you know that it's just a vision. It's just a vision.
Well, hold on.
And Mayor, if I can also add, one of the things that's important to get out of this particular meeting is to make sure that anybody who wants to have a copy of the plan has a copy of the plan. I do have one hard copy here that I'm willing to leave behind if folks would like to look at that. But up here on the sign-in sheet, I know that there's a spot for your printed name and your address. If you would also like to include an email address with that as well, I will collect these sheets at a later point, and I will make sure that anybody that provides an email address has the updated version of this here.
Would it be okay?
Well, I was just going to say, if somebody wants to get it to Paul or somebody in leadership, or to email it to the city council or the mayor, just go on the website, email. We'll be happy to get the link to you, or to print out a hard copy if you can't do that. It's an email we will get you. We want everybody to have a copy of it, so the facts are what the facts are. The plan says what it says.
I was going to say that you have the sheet outside, so that way, because we have a council meeting after this too, so.
Well, I was going to say, to speed things along, if you want, just after the fact, get with somebody or email us after the fact. Right, we were happy to do that. I know there's several people who want to speak. I want to give them an opportunity to be heard. I do appreciate everybody's kindness and politeness please limit your statements out loud. When you come to the mic, sign up, please say your name and address, and like I said, limit it best you can to 3 to 5 minutes. Paul, why don't you start, or unless you have somebody else who you want to start the order you want to do it. That's up to you guys.
Thanks, Tom. My name is Paul Velazquez. I live at 503 West Front Street in Perrysburg, and I've been here for 35 years. I've been on the board of the Perrysburg Heights Association beginning in 1991. I was gone for a little while, but I've been on the board for 20 plus years, all combined. For the last 5 years, I've served as the president of the association's board. I'd like to try to clarify some things about the sequence of events and give you a better idea of what the residents have been concerned about and what we as an association are concerned about. First of all, I know that from what we heard that most of you are already familiar with the Perrysburg Heights community. It's been there for almost 90 years. It was established by migrant farm workers and by people who migrated here from Appalachia. And many of them were farm workers who just decided to settle out of the migrant stream. It remains about 40% Latino, but it has a vibrant mix of people from Appalachia. There are African-American families, there are Irish families. I mean, it's a melting pot. And it is multi-generational. You saw from the sign that there are 5 generations of families that live there. Now, somebody from the city administration was kind enough to call me to explain that there had been a series of community meetings, or I guess they were called, well, there were some kind of community meetings virtually to talk about a land use plan. And that call came about a few days prior to the last of 4 of those virtual meetings. Prior to that time, I had never heard of a land use plan. And as far as I know, nobody in Perrysburg Heights knew anything about it. From what I saw during that 4th meeting, which I participated in, there was some talk of the survey, but it never gave any hint of what this land use plan suggests for the Perrysburg Heights neighborhood. None, X whatsoever. So during the course of that presentation, the only thing that they said about Perrysburg Heights was that there was discussion about those focus areas, but the only thing they said about Perrysburg Heights was it was just in bold letters, Perrysburg Heights redevelopment. That's it. That's it. No explanation. And so I had to quickly figure out how to use one of those chat things and ask what they meant by that. And the explanation was that, well, someday if houses disappear, we can replace them with cottage-style homes in light of the small lots. That was the explanation. So then we contacted the city administration and asked if we could talk with the consultants to find out more. And when we did, then they started talking about, it was fairly vague, but they tried to explain that there was some idea of green space, putting in cottages, and increasing walkability and access to the rest of the community. Some of which in general sounded like reasonable ideas. But then one of the consultants, when we asked who would occupy those new cottages, said, well, that will be determined by market forces. And we already know that the market forces surrounding Perrysburg Heights are intense. Levis Commons and the freeway and the general development in Perrysburg is already pushing everything to the brink. And we all know what it is to go into a neighborhood that is changing. As you know, affluent white people or affluent people generally refer to that. And we all know what gentrification is. It's a concept that all of us have heard many times. So we wrote a letter to the consultants, and I'm sorry, I thought maybe all of you had a copy of it. Mr. Van Heusen, since you asked about it originally, I'll give you a copy of it. You can share it. Do you have it?
We will make sure everybody gets a copy.
Thank you.
We'll get that to everybody tomorrow.
Now, at that point, there was no plan that any of us saw. So eventually, what they told us that they were on the verge of issuing their plan. So we waited and waited and didn't hear anything. And finally, I asked, and Brody was kind enough to send me a copy of the plan, which we reviewed. And again, it said absolutely nothing, not one word about Perrysburg Heights. The word didn't appear in there. Until you got down and read the fine print, and finally there was a future land use map, which showed an aerial photograph of Perrysburg Heights with Levis Commons across, and it had different areas around there that were color-coded based on the kind of development that the city was proposing. And for Perrysburg Heights, the color coding was exactly the same as Levis Commons. And then there was a grid below that that explained what that color code meant, and it was mixed-use village, which was 60% residential and 40% retail and commercial, which meant that the plan for the future of Perrysburg Heights was to turn it into another Levis Commons. It was a recipe for gentrification, that and nothing more, nothing less. So we then came to the City Plan Commission meeting and expressed those concerns, as you heard from Brody. And they said they would take well, actually, they didn't say anything. But after I communicated with some of the folks in the city administration afterwards, they said that they would send it back to the consultants to try to address our concerns. Then a final draft came, which you now all have. And the final draft had some window dressing, but ultimately it was exactly the same and in some ways worse. It talked about Perrysburg Heights as being a redevelopment focus area that can dramatically shape the economic success of the community in the future. I mean, Perrysburg Heights, and that neighborhood is not a cash register for the city to sit back and go cha-ching every time a new affluent person moves in with the higher tax base.
Thank you.
It talked about walkability and access to Levis Commons. Do you know how many times the people from that community and in this room have gone shopping at Levis Commons? Do you think that grandparents who are helping to raise their daughter's children while she works 2 and 3 jobs are going to go over to Levis Commons to have a bite at that new steakhouse? Or maybe their daughter on the 2 days off that she has a month will go over to one of those boutique dress shops for the next wine and cheese party that she goes to? Walkability to Levis Commons, they tag that as important to the development of this neighborhood? Are you kidding me? We made copies of the 4, 5, 6 pages that now do refer to Perrysburg Heights. We distributed them, and we ran out, and we gave out over 200, and people were still asking for them. And the comments that we heard over and over again when they read it for the first time was that they felt like people in the city considered them less than human. They felt like people in Perrysburg didn't consider them good enough to live here.
Amen.
And as far as that green space, it takes over 3 city blocks in the middle of Perrysburg Heights. It affects 45 homes. 45 homes. Green space so they can build cottages all around so that more affluent people can take advantage of it, move there, and be able to go to Love's Commons with our new walkability.
We're all families too, you know.
Just the Perrysburg Heights Association was established by these people. They started it with their efforts almost 30 years ago. It was their impetus and their hard work that got it going. And now, because of what they did, they provide educational services to people in the entire community, your children and your grandchildren, and children of other members of your family and your friends attend our reading program. And they're kept from falling behind in school, kept from being held back in the 3rd grade. The outcomes show that those kids have increased self-esteem. They have better relationships with their peers. It's not just for them, it's for the entire community, for people all over Perrysburg, in the city of Perrysburg. And that's just one of our programs. We have many, and they serve all of Perrysburg. During the pandemic, we were feeding people from all over Perrysburg. We fed over 200 kids twice a week in collaboration with the school district and the Islamic Food Bank of Toledo. And that's just the kids. There were people from all over this community. That's what they did. And this is how you repay them. This is how you repay them. And don't tell us that a land use plan that sets the impetus going for development of an area isn't going to have subsequent zoning implications, because that's how those decisions are made. The 1994, I think it was, comprehensive land use plan did exactly that, and we got Love's Commons from that. When those people...
Oh, you're at 11 minutes. Are you kind of close to...
Okay, I'd like to just read one last thing.
Well, I understand that.
No, he's right. Just we have to respect their rules here because they're important. This is one of the... We had thousands of postings, electronic postings, all of which expressed concern about what was going on. One young lady wrote, "All my friends always think it's so neat how close I am with my family, but that's how I was raised. I've never questioned how close we were. It just was that way. I thought everyone did what we did growing up. Every Sunday, we used to go to my great-grandparents, Grandma Casimiro, and Grandma Lutz. There would be 20 plus of us in and out of their home for Sunday brunch, and they'd never run out of food. And her tortillas never missed a beat. Uncle Chendo used to let us all us kids go to his place and swim for hours. We'd bike ride groups of 10 plus down every street, go to the community center, hang out with our friends and cousins. Nobody ever can say it's a bad place. People that live there for years and years know how close the community is. I've never seen so much love in my life in one community. This is where I am from, and I'll never be ashamed. It's sad when I say I'm from Perrysburg Heights and people right away respond with the Heights. It's as if it's so beneath them when actually, how well do you know your neighbors? How many parties have you had without one or more complaining about it? Hey, ours, everyone invited. There's no hate, all love. Always love.
Thank you, Paul. There's several other people I know. Is there anybody else? Oh, okay, so I understand there's a couple people that kind of planning to speak. Okay.
I think we're just going to have just a couple more, but go ahead.
Yeah, I want, yeah.
My name is Leah.
Make sure you sign up.
I will.
Thank you.
My name is Leah De La Oponce. I currently reside at 25614 Broad Street. The excerpt that he just read from social media is actually my niece, my sister's daughter, her eldest daughter. Everybody has touched on everything, so what I had wrote today kind of has already been expressed. The only thing I would say is that maybe that zoning, along with city and township, work with the residents of the community to provide them tools and processes to be able to expand on its uniqueness and to educate everybody in both jurisdictions on how we raise our children, how our children have succeeded in life. Not only do we have kids there who have been praised, but we also have people who have worked within this city. My Aunt Ophelia Rivera, who worked at Wade Public Library for 40 plus years. Manuela Urbina, who worked in this courthouse for over 40 years. My mom, who taught at WSOS for over 40 years and implemented a bilingual type of education, which was way beyond its years. We have multiple representation from young to older. This community has made us to develop us. I would not be who I am today had it not been for half these people in this room. We could go on all day long, but the only thing I can tell you is that if you want to be progressive and you want to invest in your residents, let's work together and invest in the people and the talents and the knowledge that we have. This Brody who was speaking didn't know about a lot of the stuff that was here before. I'm 37 years old and I can tell you, I remember cornfields, I remember Kelly's Deli, I remember when Churchill's was a big deal. I remember when our kids were playing on a place called Hamburger Hill with an empty lot. I remember I was not allowed out for flashlight tag, my mom was pretty strict, but I remember being able to hang out with these people. I lived in Columbus for 16 years, and I will admit that there were times that I was ashamed to say where I came from and who I was. And I can tell you that now, I will never ever step back from who I know and who I am.
Please see your name and sign in.
My name is Sharon Jeffers. I live in Perrysburg now. I grew up in the Heights. I remember getting off the school bus, could barely walk home. My parents owned a grocery store right there. And the kids helped me. I had a temperature of 104. I had infectious hepatitis. Mr. Houck's employee's husband died of that. That was in 1956. I'm 80. I love that place. Those kids were great. I grew up with half my classmates there. In my lifetime, it will never be destroyed. They're great people and they own their property. How many can you say you paid cash for your property? That's all I got to say.
So,
excuse me, sir.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. My name is Josh Courtney. I'm a resident of the city of Perrysburg. Live in the River Ridge Estates Edition. And then I'm also a landowner in Perrysburg Heights community. Several of the members of the community asked me to say a few words. Maybe I'm probably the least invested in the community. I'm a transplant to the area, a trailing spouse. We've owned lots there for about 2 years now, and I've come to know many of my neighbors, so I want to tell just a couple of stories if I could. I read about the annexation of the Fort Meigs fire station several years back, where the deal for the city to lease the fire station from the township for $1 a year. The city assumed all the equipment that came with the fire station, and the deal itself worked out to where a fire station with heritage was being handed off from one entity to another, from the township to the city. The city, of course, took on all responsibility of developing plans for the future. They needed new equipment. That was the city's responsibility. Wanted to mention that I commend the way that was handled between the two entities, and a promise at the end for mutual benefit to help each other, that the training facility in the township would always be available to the city's firefighters and vice versa. I thought it was a really exceptional example of how an adoption can take place. Excuse me. I hope annexation is the end result or an inevitable end here, that even more care will be taken in the adoption of the residents. That I understand the purpose of the land use plan. I commend the council and the steering committee and all the subcommittees that help with that. I understand it was a lot of work, and that the city does, in my observation, runs efficiently, and that there's a lot of thought put into place as to how the city will grow, and how schools and park places will be included. I hope by speaking that if I could make a distinction between, and I'm doing so just because I don't know the legal entities, but I'd like to make a distinction between the Perrysburg Heights Community Association and what I'll coin the Perrysburg Heights Association of Landowners. So I don't want to in any way speak for the Heights Association or the Perrysburg Community Heights Association. But I think a lot of the members of the unassociated or the unincorporated association of landowners, I think that they would like to see the same type of thought put into basically a parallel plan that would indicate, first of all, they'd like to see if there's 210 owners, they'd like to see 210 livable homes, domiciles left when the planning of the development is done. They want to know they'll always have a place. There's some immediate concerns for those families that are low income, fixed income, just live paycheck to paycheck, and that's if we are annexed, do the taxes go up tenfold year one? Because even if it's 4 years from now, that's an untenable result for a lot of the families in the neighborhood. Another would be for instance, the city requires homeowners to pay for sidewalks when a new home's built or when someone purchases a lot. No one wants to be blindsided by finding that within, an annexation occurs, and within months, not only is there a tax increase, there's zoning regulations, there's the cost of sidewalks. So the one thing I'd like to, thank you. I know that the mayor will be selecting or helping select members for committees under the zoning, especially in the planning, for the future planning stages on this new development. So I'd like to ask ahead of time for the unassociated or the unincorporated association of landowners, if they could have at least one, if not two representatives that be included on those committees, and then be invited or emailed, be made part of that list for any of the planning and zoning or any discussions that take place in the future for the Perrysburg Heights. And then in addition, many of the community members are already working to help neighbors who may not be able to take care of grass or clean up some of the blight. So this is a hands-on neighbor to neighbor, knocking on doors, seeing if those neighbors need help to clean up those properties or to help with the grass or any work that's needed. So just wanted to let the city and the township know that process is underway. And then if there's any correspondence or if there's any talk about those, any future zoning, if the city comes in, what can you tell us ahead of time? Where can we start? Can we get ahead of some of the issues that might arise? If streets and sidewalks are an issue, has there been any plan or talks with the township to simply keep the existing road beds, change every other street to one way, and that would allow for the space for a sidewalk immediately? There's lots of different things that can be talked about once there's the gap is bridged between the city, the township, and the residents. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Serta. I live currently at 4325 Lawrence Drive. I grew up at 12265 Harold Street. My grandparents moved to that address. I think it had a few less numbers back then in 1950. I'm third generation from the community. I also am a graduate of Perrysburg High School, class president of 2002. My mom is Anita Sanchez Serta. She's one of the co-founders of Perrysburg Heights Community Association. And of course, there's mixed owners of their property and renters. And we all want to be a part of the discussions here. I'll try and be brief. I know you guys, there's a lot of us here. And I think a majority of us are against this proposal. I have one question that I haven't heard if it was answered. And I don't know if this is the right setting for the question, but in this green space proposal, we talked about how they're going to be knocking down 44 houses, adding green space and the newer houses up. You talked about not, as the city, not taking property from the people who own this. How exactly would how exactly would the properties be, knocked down, or how would this happen?
I'll let Brody answer, but the basic answer is this is a plan, this is a diagram that doesn't have an action step towards those properties. But I'll let Brody.
Yes, to answer the question, I think we need to agree on the basis of what the plan is saying. And I know sometimes it's semantics, but the idea that this plan calls for 45 homes to be knocked down is not the case. This particular plan was developed with the idea that everything was on the table, that this is a blank canvas. So you won't find anywhere in there where it talks about displacing folks, acquiring properties, tearing down homes. That's not the intent. The way things like this have typically happened in the past is what we call land consolidation. So it is individual negotiations with property owners. If somebody says, because of a front row seat to Lettuce Commons, that your property is now worth 4 times what you paid for it, and on an individual property owner basis, that individual property owner said, I would be agreeable to moving somewhere else. I want to move to Florida. I want to move to Cincinnati. I want to move to Toledo. So they say, I'll cash out, I'll sell my property to this development, and maybe 4 or 5 of my neighbors will do the same thing, and we'll have AAA, for example, because I'll stay about 25. So again, these are all individual negotiations with property owners that go through a process called land consolidation, where you're acquiring a bunch of small pieces to make one larger piece. The city doesn't have any influence as to whether an individual property owner sells that property to a developer or somebody who's interested in consolidating those parcels or not. Those are just things that are one-on-one negotiations that can happen or not happen.
Well, I guess the city has no involvement, the city's not taking any action to consolidate that, to facilitate that.
Correct.
That is
These are all
property.
what they refer to as market forces, and the city is not a market force. We deal with the aftermath of what market forces do to properties and property owners. Market forces provide property owners with options. You can choose to accept those options or choose not to. So for example, if you look out on Route 20 in the area of Home Depot and Target and some of those stores out there, you notice there are farmhouses out in some of those areas that appear not to have been lived in for a very long time. And those are folks that hold out. They didn't give in. They didn't sell to developers. That's why there's not a parking lot there or a big box retail store. But eventually, there's wheels that are in motion, and market forces, as Paul alluded to, are intense here in Northwest Ohio. They're intense here in Perrysburg. So again, this is just an option to say, if your friends, if your neighbors decide to cash out, and move somewhere else. And I'm not suggesting that anybody does that, will do that, should do that. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we need to be prepared, because that's a reality because of the success of the city that many of you in this room will have at some point in your life, or your children will have at some point in their life, is to make that decision. So.
Yeah, I think you've answered that.
So I think he answered that for us, and it's simple. We just don't sell. Right?
Did you sign in?
Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is David Baker. I got a question. Are you guys meeting next week to put this in play?
There's, as was articulated, it's ongoing process. Planning Committee of Council will review and have it, and it could take, there's no specific anticipation. I don't speak for the Planning and Zoning Committee of Council, but I do not anticipate any action being taken next time. It's just the start of the process of discussing it. It would be the normal process. And so I would, if you sign up, sign in, I would think that we would make every extra effort to make sure that residents know when this item would be on the agenda of the Planning and Zoning Committee of Council.
Right, because I just want everybody to know that basically that's what they're going to do, is vote next week. I mean, that's what it's usually called for.
Well, I'm not going to disagree.
I mean, I'm just asking that way everybody knows.
I think we answered the question that's not. We've tried to be as fair as possible and give everybody a chance to be heard. So that's up to council. But I would anticipate, knowing council members, that it would be several weeks at least.
Yeah.
Several weeks.
I feel comfortable being on that committee, saying, and Tim's not here, he's the chair for that. Barry's on that committee as well. We're going to make every effort to make sure the members of your community are heard or feel heard in that committee. I think from the general idea of everyone that spoke, that you heard speak on council, we want you to be involved. If our plan involves where you live, absolutely, you should be at that meeting trying to help guide us to what the plan is moving forward for the final adoption. Just because the plan's written this way today doesn't mean it will be presented that way to council. This is the first step.
I understand that don't have to jump on the proposal, but once that proposal is agreed upon, you could wait a year, you could wait 5 years, you could wait 5 days if they jump on it. You understand what I'm asking?
I think what the best way to answer your concern is to make sure we give public notice to everybody so they know when the meetings are going to be held, they have a chance to participate, and then council is going to do its due diligence.
Because then we want all these people back to do the same thing. Thank you.
This is how democracy works. Paul, do you have anybody else? I think there's one more. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Are you all right?
while he's getting here, I do want to thank you all for your patience and wearing a mask.
Hello.
Nobody likes it, but we appreciate you doing that. 2, we appreciate your cooperation and assistance going through the metal detector. We know that's not something everybody likes either, but we do appreciate your patience and cooperation in doing that. So,
Hello, everybody. My name is Antonio Mendieta. I've lived in the Heights since 1965. I retired 36 years ago from Willis Overland Jeep Corporation. I raised 9 kids. We moved there in 1965 for a little bit of money, and I enjoyed. There was no water, no electric, no gas, and we scattered when we done so many things together and raised my family there with 9 kids. And I've been retired for 36 years. And we bought this place here, reasonable. And I've been living there for all this time. And I know quite a few people around. There was nothing but sugar beet fields around there at that time. Tomato fields and that, and I picked tomatoes quite a bit too myself when I was a young kid, you know. But I retired from Jeep. I became very accepted with the union committee and all that kind of stuff, and I raised all of my family here. I raised one that went to Germany. As a matter of fact, I went to Germany to see my son when he was in the service. And I just want to tell you people that I love where I live, and that's my pride. My family was all raised there. They're all well-to-do, thank God for that. And I just want to tell everybody, I'm 94 years old, and I love the Heights. I respect everybody in the Heights, and I'd like to continue on living there if possible.
thank you.
I think that's it. I got one.
Okay.
My name's Brad Bell. Lived in the Heights for about 30 years. I'm just wondering if, out of like, say, the park proposal of 45 people or whatever, if you got 43 of them that want to sell out and 2 that don't, then what? And why a park?
As we said, we're not part of that process.
Well, maybe I'll ask you, a zoning guy here. How much money do you guys spend on this proposal that you have all these companies come up with for you for a park? Do you know?
I mean, that's public information we'll be happy to put out. We're not going to really I'm not going to put him on the hot seat. We're all elected officials.
Well, for you future elected officials, think about something other than a park, because you're being left apart from Doug Pratt. It's going to be the 2nd biggest metro park in Ohio, so I don't think we need another park. Thank you.
There was some, there you go. Thank you. Did you sign in, sir? Did you sign in? We did. Okay.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Justin Rex. I am an 8-year resident of Perrysburg at 408 West 7th Street. I'm speaking tonight not on behalf of the Heights residents, but I wanted to raise some larger concerns that I think this issue is symptomatic of that are problematic in the overall plan, and so I wanted to voice that this evening. I'm a professor of political science at BGSU, and I'm also a member of the Wood County Continuum of Care. It's a local cooperation of nonprofit, religious, and public servants that deal with affordable housing and homelessness issues in the county. I'm also a member of the Perrysburg Coalition for Inclusion and Social Justice, an organization that deals with a variety of issues related to inclusion and social justice in the area. And I come here not speaking on behalf or for any of those groups. Just wanted to give that context as somebody who's involved in these issues and somewhat knowledgeable, at least maybe a little bit knowledgeable about housing and related issues in the community, because I research and teach and participate in organizations that are involved in these. And so my concern with the plan is that it makes kind of notional concerns towards wanting to increase diversity in Perrysburg, but doesn't actually make any concrete hard steps that need to be taken to actually do that. And as such, the community of Perrysburg will continue to not have any more neighborhoods or vital neighborhoods like the Heights, like Perrysburg Heights, because of the policy decisions that we make at the local level. And so we all seem to like the vitality and the diversity and the community that neighborhood brings, but the local decisions and the plan as laid out will not allow another community like that to be developed in Perrysburg. And so my overall concern is that we're giving these cheers for this community, as we should, but we're not actually making the hard political decisions to develop more neighborhoods and communities like that. We're actually making decisions to preclude those type of communities from ever being developed in Perrysburg. And so my, I guess, broader point is that we have an affordability crisis, an eviction crisis, not just locally in Ohio, across the country, and it's been going on even before the pandemic. And there are lots of federal, state, and local policies that contribute to this, but in particular, ones that you as members of the City Council and the Planning Commission can make decisions on are those related to zoning, right? And what type of housing units, or whether there are multi-family units available for mixed use and more affordable housing in the community. And so right now, the plan does mention that there are 7 or 8 acres, that are zoned for multifamily housing that could be turned into that. And there are lots of other unused places that could be zoned to provide more multifamily housing. But those kinds of decisions are the ones that we need to make, and zoning decisions that need to be made to actually encourage that type of housing to be developed so that we can have more inclusivity, more diversity, and more neighborhoods like Perrysburg Heights. And so I'd encourage you all, if we claim to like that neighborhood and what it can provide, and I think we've seen testament here tonight to what that longstanding neighborhood has provided to its residents, but also its relationship to the actual city, that we should actually make decisions that we can make and not just claim that market forces, that we're kind of at the behest of market forces and reactive to those. Lots of residential decisions about where people live are actually government policy decisions that have been made at the federal, state, and local level. And so we can shape the market. You can shape the market by the decisions you make. And so if we want to do that, to grow, to have more diverse communities, we need to make those tough decisions to actually put our money and our policy decisions to actually shape the communities that we want to live in. And so I'd encourage you all, and I'll be happy to attend future meetings, but I encourage you all to think about those decisions in the lack of any mention, whatsoever in this plan about housing affordability, or, I think once or twice diversity is mentioned in the plan, but it's kind of a priority, allegedly, but it's not prioritized whatsoever in the plan because none of the policy decisions or goals that are laid out in the plan actually move us towards that, to being a more inclusive community. And so I guess in conclusion, we can do better, I think, and hopefully as we try to implement this plan as a community, we can reshape and change some of those priorities to actually make Perrysburg more inclusive. It's no accident that Perrysburg is majority white, not majority, almost exclusively white, and fairly well off. It's because we've, like every other community and suburban community around the country, we've made decisions to not allow affordable housing to actually be built in our communities by our local zoning decisions. And so I think, again, we should make better decisions about that to be a more open community to the type of people that we want to be here. So thanks for my time, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joanne Mercer. I moved out during the Heights in 1970. My kids were raised out there. 2 of them, one came in when she was a year old, and my son came in when he was 3 months. I raised all 4 of my kids out there in the Heights. They all grew up, all the kids that lived in that time out there in the Heights. And my kids are still friends with the kids I grew up with. My daughter still talks to Tanya DeLeo. My one daughter talks to Nanny Oviedo. So It's a small knit family community that the kids are still friends with while they live there. And I'm still a resident of that house. So I just want to say, I love the Perrysburg Heights also.
I'm sorry, did you sign in?
I'm sorry.
I didn't remind you, so it's not me.
Nothing like a master plan to bring everyone together from the community. My name is Todd France. I live at 804 Streamview Drive in Perrysburg. I've been a resident for 5 years. My wife and I have tried to be upstanding citizens of this great community. I serve on the Citizens Parks and Rec Committee. She and I coach soccer for the local nonprofit organization. We use the great resource at the Perrysburg Heights, the community center there for winter practices as well. So that's great for us. I teach engineering at Ohio Northern University. I specialize in residential sustainable building design. I just wanted to bring a different perspective. Certainly appreciate all the hard work from the mayor's office, from the city council in putting this master plan together. While certainly we don't all agree on everything in there, there are some good elements in there, such as parks and greenways for connectivity. I bring this up because, as many of you probably know, non-motorized connectivity in Perrysburg is severely lacking. Certainly to get to the Heights, I don't have to travel that far by car, but by bike, it's a little sketchy, dangerous at times. If you live outside the belt, 475 belt, you don't have direct access to a park unless you're walking along Fort Meigs Road to Rotary or Rivercrest Park, and certainly that's highlighted and embedded throughout this master plan. So I would just encourage the council and the mayor's office to think about some more of the explicit, we'll say, sustainable design elements that we're lacking in this master plan, such as east-west roads to take advantage of passive and active solar strategies. Certainly reading about a recommendation of a half an acre per new lot, two lots per acre, is only going to accelerate the growth outward and make it more difficult for folks to get into our great downtown area other than by vehicle. And I would also recommend that we certainly consider the residents that are most impacted by greenways and pathways and such, but also keep in mind that there would be thousands of people using these greenways, so we want to keep them in mind as well. In the same, in light of that as well, I think that we know what's happening with Perrysburg. It's growing at a pretty fast clip. We know what the home builders are doing. They're building 3,000, 4,000 square foot homes on the very outskirts of town. And I don't think that's a great way to connect folks, particularly when in their developments they have green space and such that is isolated and has no connectivity to the rest of the community. So that would be just my suggestion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right. I think we'll have the council to consider next week. If you want to make sure you get notice of the council takes action related to this, please make sure you sign in. Mary Jo, can you take that to the hallway, or you could email any council member? An atrium, or make sure you email any of us. We'll make sure it gets to Brody and Mr. the Planning Zone Office so it can get distributed. Thank you very much.
Can you recap the time and place for the planning and zoning next week if you don't mind?
Somebody raised their hand up. Okay. Brody, would you just remind people when it is, and next Wednesday at 5:30?
Next Wednesday, the 15th at 5:30, will be in this location.
Okay. Nothing else? We need a motion to adjourn. So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. We'll start council in 10